Hi there. My name is Luke. I will be talking to you today about LISTO and what LISTO means for PATRÓN perfectionists, but not just PATRÓN perfectionists, but also drinks culture at large, the bartenders that we work with every day, right? And so, what it means to me, there's going to be a bit of a personal message here as well. I'm very connected to this area of cocktails and this area of bartending. Um, this is really about the experience that people have with your drinks, the have with your particular style of hospitality. And I'm all about hospitality. I'm all about having these amazing experiences in bars and in restaurants and all around the world. And a lot of these are driven by you, by creative bartenders that do these amazing things every day and take a lot of passion and love to do. What is Lister? What is Betraying Perfectionist? How does it fit in together? We have had years of these competitions stacking on top of each other, and every year they have developed more and more and more. The evolution of Pretend Perfections has been amazing. It's a big part of why we show all of the previous finalist drinks on the Pretend Perfections website. It's an amazing resource, and you can look at how the styles of drinks have changed over the years, how presentation has changed, how stories behind those drinks have changed as well, right? It's about a community growing together, developing, becoming more innovative, more interesting, more creative at the end of the day. Creativity is a big part of bars and bartending and drinks culture. I've been to many bars around the world where I don't remember what the drinks I had there were. This was years ago. But I remember the experiences I had. I remember the memories that I left that bar with. And I remember these important moments of my entire view of cocktail culture changing completely just because of how something was presented to me, the theatrics and the ideas behind these drinks. Yeah, first of all, before we get into it, so my name is Luke Knox. I am the Bacardi Trade Ambassador for KwaZulu-Natal here in South Africa. I've been in the hospitality industry for 14 years, so a fair bit. Very humble beginnings, but at one point during that journey, I found myself in bars, and I kind of fell in love with the culture of bars and bartending. I I dropped out of university to pursue a career as a bartender, which is not normally a recommended thing, but it worked out pretty well for me. I have a huge amount of passion for this industry and for the people in it. I've always been one for educating and uplifting bartenders in the industry around me. I've always thought, the all ships rise with the same tide. As much as we can educate other bartenders around us in the industry grows as a whole, and it's better for us. Which actually has put me in a perfect position with Bacardi and right here today to spread this knowledge and spread this education and teach people about these amazing areas that we can develop as bartenders and as storytellers through our drinks. Please follow me on Instagram if you have some time. I'm always happy to connect with bartenders. But beyond that, let's get into the session. So, when we're talking about Listo, there's many aspects to it. The most obvious one is your garnish, right? Um, a final flourish is a great way of putting it. It is your way of expressing what this drink is trying to tell you. There are many ways to do that. And we're going to be covering different areas and different styles. Some of them you might know already, you might be very familiar with. Some of them you might not. So, we're talking about theatre, serviceware, techniques, and the senses. The senses is probably one of the most important ones. Before we get into it, into the good meaty parts of the presentation, I do have to thank two very important people. Harrison Kennedy was the winner of Patron Perfectionist Global Finals. He is a very inspirational bartender from Sydney, Australia, and he has this approach to bartending and drinks where he really adds a personal element of himself to the drinking culture and the people around him and the customers that enjoy his beverages. There's quite a bit of humor and a piece of himself almost that fits into those drinks and tells the story very effectively. Then we have Lawrence Gabriel, Lawrence Gabriel, same competition as Harrison Kennedy, pulled in just behind him at second. Very inspirational bartender from the Philippines. Inspired us so much, in fact, that he now works for Bacardi as a trade ambassador in the Philippines. And we brought him into the fold because he loves exploring the world of drinks and then telling stories and discoveries through that exploration through those drinks themselves. So, two very, very cool people. I encourage you to look them up online. Inspirational bartenders that are making big waves and big moves in the industry. Now, into the idea of the history of tableside theatre, right? It's not something that's very new. It's actually very, very old. I'm not going to get too into the meaty bits of all of these different events, right? You can read through these as much as you like, but it shows that there is a history of flourishing and embellishment when it comes to not just drinks but also food. It's been a part of cuisine and food culture for a very long time. Chefs are not just trying to make delicious meals, but they're trying to tell a story through them and express them and portray them in a very particular way. Sometimes they're comedy, as with the helmeted cock. Sometimes it's more about the science behind a meal, the science behind how it's put together, the aromas, the sounds, the visuals, right? So there's different aspects and different avenues that we can go down, but there's a long history of the style of creating a theater through cuisine and through drinks and through meals. What's also very important to note is that it not always has to do with the meal itself. It doesn't have to be on the plate. A lot of these various expressions of tableside theatre have to do with how is it prepared and the environment that you're in. Right? The environment you're in plays a big part in flavor and experience. If we look at some examples of changing the decor, music of an entire restaurant or dining area to suit one particular meal or one particular celebration. We look at a culture of large scale feasts that were quite popular way back in the day. And a big part of that was music and singing and celebration. We look at some of the more modern methods of this. If you go back only a few hundred years, you start to look at flambeing, a tableside experience that it could very well be done in the kitchen out of everyone's eyes and still have the same effect on the flavor, but doing it in person adds a certain element of wow to that experience, to that meal, and it changes people's perception of that meal. And we can so breaking down into the more of those 4 points, the senses. This is a very important part of garnishing and of Listo for me. This is where we can really engineer flavors, aromas, and various other elements to work in our favor and to deliver ingredients and flavors the way we want to the people that are drinking our drinks. Right. The first of these senses is sight. I think the saying "you eat with your eyes" has always been a thing. It's useless having a delicious cocktail that doesn't look appealing or appetizing. We're trying to not only make someone want to drink our drink, but also we want them to get a certain idea of what that drink's going to be when they look at it. Right? A good example of this, if we look at this texture, it's a lot easier when we have the names put out there: soft, hard, sparkly, shard, rough, textured. But those different types of font deliver those ideas at the same time. Soft is it almost looks very squishy. It looks like you could squeeze it like a marshmallow. But sharp, rough, these look like they have a bit of texture to them. It looks like you don't want to touch them, right? They're not as welcoming. These aren't necessarily a bad thing, but it's how are you trying to deliver these ideas? A good example of that is how there's been a big trend with gin and tonics in large, round cocoa glasses. And there's this idea of round shapes being softer and more welcoming. People being happier to drink these drinks out of these large, circular, spherical glassware. If we look at a history of glassware, most of them are round, right? When we start to think of circular glasses, we're thinking, very soft, welcoming ideas. Take that same drink, put it in a triangular glass. I know it's a little strange, but put it in a triangular glass, it looks very different, right? Where do I sip it from? Am I sipping from a corner or from the sides? It's a little bit more difficult to drink out of. It's not as welcoming, and it almost seems a bit harsher or more bitter. This is an idea that we almost subconsciously do and don't even think about. Now that we're aware of it, we can say, okay, how am I going to take advantage of these? How am I going to be aware of this and use it to my advantage and make this work for my drink and make this work for my story? Do I want my drink to be a little bit more abrasive? Do I want it to be sharper? Do I want it to be textured? Do I want the glass to be frosted? Do I want to put it in a glass at all? Do I want to put it in a different kind of vessel that portrays a different one of these ideas? Right? How am I presenting it? Am I presenting it just in a glass, or am I presenting something else around it? I've seen plenty of creative serves. I've seen people serve drinks in terrariums or small bowls with little bonsai trees. I've seen some drinks served with the garnish around them and not even on top of the glass or in the drink. I've seen drinks served with aromatic garnishes and served in different ways. So these are all taking advantage of some of these different ideas, right? Even looking away from the vessel, what are you introducing to somebody before they even look at the vessel that's giving them an idea of one of these different textures or thoughts or even other visual indicators? Is it something to do with incense, or is it light, or is it music, right? How are we building this idea of what this drink is going to be? And this can be very, very simple, like a simple zest on top of a cocktail, or it can be something very intricate and very well put together. This is up to you. This is up to your creativity. And this is not something that's new. This has been done, again, for a very, very long time. And there's lots of resources to look at of people that have built these stories, not just around drinks, but around meals. And we can leverage those to make our drinking experience better for the people enjoying our cocktails. This is a really great example of something that is very interesting, probably a little difficult to pull off, but when it's in the glass, when it's presented to somebody, it's a big wow factor. Now, already, this is not a drink that you can put at the service bar and someone pours for themselves at a table. So already there's an element of you need to serve this at the table to somebody, right? Now, obviously, very interesting idea. It's this visual appeal, this theater of pouring a liquid out into a glass and watching it freeze in front of a customer. Um, this is done through super chilling it to a certain temperature in a very controlled environment, being very, very careful with that vessel. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this before, but very similar thing happens. For instance, a bit of a similar story. I've had it with bottles of beer, where you leave a beer in a freezer for too long, thinking, oh, I'll leave it there for a couple hours and I'll take it out and I'll drink it. And you forget it. The next day you take it out and you look, oh, it's still liquid. And you crack it open and immediately it freezes. So a bartender took this concept and thought, how can I turn this into an interesting serve for my drink? And found a way to have a frozen martini, a super cool martini, we could say. And through this has taken a simple drink that pretty much every other bar in the world could make and made it in a different way and portrayed it in a different way and showed it off in a different way to capture the appeal of the customer and to give them an experience of it before they even taste it. That's what Listo has the opportunity to do, is build that experience for our customers before they even take a sip of the drink. Smell is a beautiful part of Listo. It's a beautiful part of drinks, of food, of flavor. A big part of flavor is aromatics, it's smell. I think we all know when we have a cold and we try and have a nice meal or have a great cocktail, suddenly we can't taste most of it, right? There's old stories of very bitter medicine, and you block your nose before you swallow it, so that you're not experiencing that very acidic, bitter flavor. So smell is a great leverage for us to make our drinks better. This is a great example of this. I'm sure some have noticed this style of serving an aromatic with a dish before. There was obviously a dessert many, many years ago that had sort of a sugar bubble filled with this appley aroma, and you would pop the apple, smell the aroma, eat the sugar, eat the dessert. Very similar take on it with a drink, and again with this idea of an aromatic being served with it. Difference being there was a little bit of a journey with this. The air inside would initially be lighter than air, and this sort of balloon would slowly lift up. And as the air inside started to get a little bit denser, it would slowly drift down onto the cocktail, and then you would pop it, experience the aroma, and then sip the drink. Now there is a culture being done around the drink first. There is this action, there's this almost ritual happening around this drink, this theater. Before you even sip the drink, you have to experience this unique, interesting serve and smell these aromas and then drink the drink and experience that for all it is. I'm going to move my camera here so you can see. So the drink is called Above and Beyond. It's served at the Artesian in London. If you want to have a little bit more research and look at it a little bit more, I encourage you. Great bar, great serve, very interesting way of going about it. This is maybe one of the more intricate, more difficult ways to do these serves, but it's not impossible. And there's other ways that we can leverage these ideas and other ways that we can go about these. Sound. Now, I mentioned earlier the area you're in, the environment, and the music, the sound that you're experiencing, that plays a big part on the senses as well. When we think of enjoying a beverage or a meal, the mood that you're in, the thoughts going through your head, a lot of these things play an impact. Again, like I said right at the beginning of the session, a lot of the drinks that I've experienced in these amazing bars and these amazing experiences I've had, I don't necessarily remember how the drink tasted, but I remember the environment I was in. I remember the stories that were told to me. I remember how I felt. And sound plays a part in that as well. And this is how we attach good memories to these drinks and good memories to these flavors, is putting together this whole orchestra of sound and smell and sight, etc., with the senses. So this isn't something that you can sort of push to the side and ignore. It's a useful tool. And all of these are tools. You can use them or you can leave them alone, but using them helps us build your drink and helps us build the story, this theater, this idea of what we're trying to do together. Another great example, very similar to how we saw earlier, but instead of looking at textures, we are opening up a little bit more, right? We're starting to see how textures and sounds can fit together, right? Some of these are very much loud, but have very different styles. Some are explosive, some are abrasive, some might not be. Some might be, a little more softer on the ears, while still being loud and still being dominant. It's about the message that we're getting across, and we see this with music very often. If you're looking at pop versus rock versus metal versus rap, all of these different mediums of music are there to tell a story. They're just doing it in different ways, right? How can we take that idea, manipulate it, turn it into something that'll work for us for our drinks, right? There's no reason we can't do the same thing that musicians do. We are artists in our own form. We are creatives in our own way. How can we make use of every single tool, every single thing we have at our disposal to make it better? So this is another really great example. This is Sound of the Sea, a meal that was served at the Fat Duck in England. I know we've been talking about drinks, but it's great to bring in food as well. And what was really interesting is with the serve, in one of the shells that they used for the plating, for the garnishing, there was actually a small music player that would play the sounds of the sea, right? Waves crashing, seagulls chirping, right? The crunching of sand under your feet. And this was a audio experience that pulled everything together for the meal, right? So we have aroma, we have visual, but we have audio as well playing a part of it. And it's there to transport people to the ocean, right? And that's what we should be doing with our drinks is transporting people to another place. It can be a real place, it can be an imaginary place, but that's what we're trying to do. Cocktails are a portal to this new world and these new experiences. And this is just another way we can do that. It's another weapon in our arsenal to deliver these ideas and to transport people to these places and give them these experiences. And that's what's really special about Listo. Touch, this is, for me, a very cool part of it. I love texture, not just when it comes to spirits, but when it comes to everything that works around cocktails. Um, just before we even continue on this, one thing that I really love about Patron is the bottles. The fact that they're handmade, you can feel the little ripples, the little textures on the bottle. And for me, that's sort of telling the story of the guys that hand make those bottles, right? It's a little experience I almost share personally with the bottles before I open them up and before I pour them. I have my own little personal tradition of feeling the ripples on the edges of the bottles and thinking about the men and women that work in the production line and make those bottles by hand. So touch is a very important thing for me. It's a thing that's very close to my heart. It's a way of telling stories and a way of remembering what people have done and how they put these things together. But it also plays a big part in the experience of drinking our cocktails for the people that are enjoying them, right? And touch extends to more than just texture, it's temperature, it's all sorts of things, right? And we've got great examples of them here. You've got fur, you've got skin, you've got rock, you've got ice. And when we think about texture, right, we subconsciously react to that as well. Think of when you have a glass in your hand and you're looking at the frosting of the glass and the cold texture of the drink, and you see the ice bubbling up at the surface. Maybe there's a bit of foam in there in the drink, and we're looking at all that texture, and we bring the drink close to our mouth, and your mouth almost waters a little bit because subconsciously you're perceiving all these things, and you get an idea of all those textures, and you know what's going to happen, and you start to salivate. Think of that same thing, but you're trying to lick a brick, right? I know it's a weird idea. I sound a little crazy right now, but when we look at a brick, it's dry, it's rough, it's abrasive, it's not appetizing at all. So if you bring a brick closer to your mouth is almost going to dry up a little bit because subconsciously you're like, I don't want to taste this. This isn't going to be nice. I'm not going to enjoy this, right? This is an example of how we can perceive touch in different ways. As soon as I touch that brick, as soon as I grab it, I can feel that rough texture. I can feel the dirt on it. I can feel it's dry, hard, and horrible, and it's not something for me to taste. And so I subconsciously react to it. My body even reacts to it, right? People that drink your drinks are going to respond the same way when they pick up your drink. When they pick up your drink, the way they're feeling it, right? The feelings that they're getting in their hands and the way they're perceiving the pictures, even through other means like sight and sound, they're going to react to it, right? How people can react to textures in other ways is if you get fresh bread and you squeeze it and you hear that cracking, right? You can feel it cracking and you hear that audio. You can feel the texture of crispy, fresh bread, and it's very pleasant. If you squeeze it and it's very stale and it squishes, suddenly not so much, right? So we find one more appealing than the other. So how can we attach this to drinks, right? Your lips are super sensitive, incredibly so, right? They are probably one of the softest, most reactive parts of your body, and there is a reason why we do certain things with drinks. Like I said, stimulating that idea of taste and simulating that delivery of your lips and your mouth to whatever you're tasting or drinking is going to have a subconscious reaction. It's going to, as much as it sounds like this, encourage saliva production, right? So, what part of drink are we delivering to our mouths? We can see this in very simple ways. Are we using a straw or are we sipping directly from the drink? This is a big reason why a coupe exists, or a Nicanora glass, or a martini glass. If you put a straw in there, you're going to look a little bit silly. And the reason we want to sip directly from those glasses is because we want to deliver the texture and the ideas of those drinks. Think of a martini, silky, smooth, very luxurious, right? We don't think of it as sharp or abrasive. We think of it as long, delicate, elegant feeling. If we look at, say a shaken cocktail that we serve you in a coupe, maybe we want this frothy, fluffy, airy texture. We want that very aromatic vibe, and we want, say, if we have a little bit of foam in there, say it's like a sours or something along those lines, we want that puffy, sort of airy texture of the foam to hit those lips, and we want that experience to be delivered as well. Touch is a big impact, not just with drinks, but with food and every other part of our lives. Think of when we are babies, when we're infants. What's the first thing we do? We want to grab everything we can and experience the touch, and then we want to put it to our mouths and see what it tastes like, right? And this doesn't change, right? As we grow up into adults, we're just maybe a little bit more polite to how we go about this. But these are really great ways that we can experience things and feel textures and get an idea of how we enjoy different things, right? And that's very important for us. These are two really great serves, right? I love the first one. I know we shouldn't be biased, but I really love the first drink, Primordial. It's served at Sips Drinkery House in Barcelona. And the idea of these two metallic cans, first of all, the first thing you're going to think of is the feel of the vessel on your lips, right? It's a sort of cold metallic feeling, right? Very different to glass. Glass is like very thin, very smooth. Um, but metal, this is obviously it's a lot wider. It's going to be very cold. It's not going to feel the same against our lips. If we look at El Dorado, again, now this looks more like wood. So it might almost dry up your lips slightly when you touch your lips to it because it might absorb some of that moisture. It's going to feel a bit of the grain of the woods. You're going to feel more texture on there, right? I really love the idea of Primordial. I want to talk about this drink just a little bit. I think it's really cool. The idea of sipping out of a vessel that is in itself two hands is almost like dipping your hands into a drink and sipping it out of your own hands. And the idea of Primordial is like almost going back to our roots and going back to a more primitive way of man. And that's the message that this drink is trying to tell. And we see that through sound. That's very important. But the texture of it as well is just as important. If you're drinking out of your hands, you have lips against skin. It's going to be very different as opposed to lips against metal. Metal is going to be very cold, very neutral, very. When we think of metal, we think of like logical, scientific. We don't think creative and unique and interesting. But it might almost be a contrast, right? Contrast is a big part of LISTO and a big part of garnishes as well. It's almost talking about this primitive way of man and this primitive way of drinking. But when we think of metal, it's almost this very modern thing. So it's almost clashing in our heads. So again, very cool concept. When we look at El Dorado, we have this very cool carved skull of an animal, right? We're drinking out of that. Again, it's almost this like animalistic vibe of thinking about like drinking out of a skull. It's invoking these very interesting thoughts in our heads, and the wood as well. again, that texture, it's almost the opposite of primordial, funny enough. We're leading away from that very modern method of glass and metal, and we're going back to these roots of wood, and we're experiencing this drink in a different way. So the texture of your vessel, the texture of your drink, the liquid, what we're presenting on there as well. There are also other ways of experiencing texture and touch on our lips with our drinks. There have been many versions of oils, right, in serves, be it fruit oils from citrus zest or olive oils that have been infused with different flavors, and these play a role in that as well. All right, so touch plays more of a role than we realize, and there's more avenues to show that sense to people than we realize. And it allows us to be very creative with it as well. Finally, we come to taste. And it's funny how I feel like I've always been talking about taste this entire time, but through other senses. And that's kind of the message that we're trying to get across here. Taste is not just taste, it's many other aspects. And it's how can we take these different senses and utilize them and make them work for us and make them unique and interesting, right? When we talk about global platforms like PATRÓN Perfectionist, uh, it is in fact a very competitive space. We have hundreds of people around the world that are all competing to show that their drink is the best. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is manipulating every single one of these tools at your disposal. Leaving any of them on the table is going to set you back. It's going to put you on the back foot. If you ignore any of these, it's an avenue that you've not utilized. And the fact that taste is lost should almost tell you that all of these other examples of taste are so important that this is almost an afterthought, right? This is what we're trying to express when it comes to this idea of building the story with every sort of element in mind. The smells, the sights, the textures, the feels, all of these come into play before we even sip the drink, right? We look at the cocktail, we smell the cocktail, we feel the cocktail before we taste it. And all of these things are building an impression of it, almost a prejudice of the drink before you taste it, right? Talking about taste, talking about your ingredients, how we're pairing them together, how are we serving this drink? Are we wanting an experience around it? Are we wanting food to be a part of the serve? You know, do we want people to have caviar chasers and get this umami, salty, very sort of mineral ocean kind of vibe from it? Are we wanting a very dry, spicy finish from these tagine cucumbers? What kind of avenue are we going down, right? How are we incorporating taste, not just in the drink? Obviously, taste in the drink is very important. You need a good tasting drink, but how are we incorporating taste in our drink in other ways? Are we having a culture, a serve, a ritual around it? Like those floating balloons of aroma, are we serving something on the side and having it as an experience? This can be something as small and simple as a little slice of banana bread, right? Or it can be something more elegant and more refined and a little bit bigger and a little bit more bolder. That's up to you. Cool. Sorry. So, like I said before, use these tools at your disposal and make it fun. I know I've talked about them for probably about half an hour now. This is a very interesting and honestly a very fun thing to do. Like I said before, we are creatives. We are artists in our own mind, and we are building these beautiful drinks and presenting them as a work of art. And it's almost poetic in the sense that it's a work of art that doesn't last very long in a physical sense, but it lasts forever in the minds and the impressions of the people that enjoy them. I have had bartenders make me great drinks before, but I've forgotten a lot of them. But I haven't forgotten the amazing drinks, the impressive serves, the impressive ideas, the stories behind them, the unique and interesting ways of presenting these things to me, and forcing me to look at my own senses in a different way. That's what I've been left with. And that's our job as bartenders. to make these things for our customers and to give them these experiences. And that's what PATRÓN Perfectionist is there to do. So I hope at least partway into this presentation, I've inspired you a little bit about using all of these senses and using all of these tools and all these opportunities to your disposal to make your drinks better. This is a great example of a beautiful drink made by David Van Zyl. Let me just move my face out of the way. So he's a Cape Townian, fellow South African, just like me. He was our finalist at Globals for one of the years of Perfectionist, and this is his drink put together. So, like I said, we have all of the drinks of all of the finalists on our online platforms. They're great avenues to learn how are people creating these flavors, creating these ideas, right? Putting these things together, these different elements, the stories behind them. I encourage you to go have a look at them, try them out if you can. What's beautiful about a lot of these Perfectionist cocktails is a lot of them can be made anywhere in the world. A lot of these ingredients are very easy to find. We've included a lot of the recipes, in fact, all of the recipes for all of the homemade ingredients on the site as well. So I encourage you to try them out because these are drinks that have made the test, they've passed the test, they've made their way through to global finals. This is great examples of the kind of drinks we're looking for, the stories behind them, and how they're made. So I encourage you to have a look at those. Now, I mentioned contrast before. I didn't go too far into it, but contrast is a part of this almost two-part system that we're looking at of harmony and contrast. Are we trying to make the presentation and the garnish around the drink work in tandem with the colors, the flavors, all of those elements, or are we trying to create a contrast, right? It's very obvious looking at these things that we're talking about. Are we pairing something that almost looks like it belongs and it fits in perfectly into that drink, and it almost hides that inside it, like it's not even a garnish, like it's just a part of that drink, it's just part of the ingredients? Or are we trying to make a splash, make ourselves known, trying to stand out, right? Trying to draw attention. That's another part of it. If we are looking at something that's harmonious and very simple and elegant, it almost fades into the drink and becomes part of it as a whole. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. It blends in and creates this sort of perfect concentric idea, this visual, this story, this art piece. When it comes to contrast, suddenly we have a focal point. We have somewhere we're looking. We're having a point that draws our interest, and we stop there, right? That's a very powerful tool. Where do we want people drinking our drinks to start looking at? Where do we want them to draw their attention to? Are we doing it to something that's on the side of the drink? Are we doing it to something that's in the drink, on top of the drink, around the drink? Is it an aroma? Is it a visual? Is it a texture? Right? This is a way that we can draw people to certain elements of these various senses we've talked about and to start the journey of the cocktail there. Right? So this is just another layer of control that we have over the experience that the consumer or the customer is having with our drinks. So I think salt and pepper is something that is so well known in a Paloma. When we think of salt in a Paloma, it's almost like we don't even notice it. It's there. It's part of the ingredient. It's in there. It's part of the drink itself. It's not a focal point. It's not something that's drawing us into it. But there may be other ways that we can do that. A cool idea that was executed with this drink. I'm going to try and move my head across here. There we go. So we've got these Szechuan peppercorns and mulled and sea salt that we've mixed into the soda. So we don't even see the salt or the pepper on the sides of the drink, around the drink, right? It's inside the drink. It's part of the ingredients. It's part of the flavor profile. So what we've done is we've got a bitter grapefruit jelly that we've sort of set into an actual hollowed out half of a grapefruit and cut into a slice. So now, when people look at it, they get this nice uniform pink color. We see what appears at first to be a grapefruit wedge. Everything's almost blending in, but then when we get closer, suddenly everything changes a little bit, right? We look at it and we think, that's not a grapefruit. Hold on, what is this? And it creates this idea of inquiry, this idea of this is almost a mystery. This is almost something I have to figure out and solve. This is an idea of harmony, right? We don't think of the salt or the pepper in the drink, but we're being drawn to this unique and different way of serving grapefruit. So this is an idea of how Listo can change someone's experience of a very simple drink, a very classic drink, and also draw their attention to a specific thing in that drink. This is my favorite part, actually, the tasting part of these presentations. If you are fortunate enough to have some Patron tequila in front of you, I implore you to taste along while I talk a little bit about what the tequila is about and what Patron is about and what these three different expressions of tequila